Let's talk about throwing. So we both were throwers. You were a track and field guy at Amherst and the University of Ashland. I threw track and field in high school and got into Highland Games the same year I got into throwing. What drew you to throwing to begin with?
So in 7th grade, my math teacher, Mr. Pexy, was actually the throws coach at junior high, and I had no idea what throwing was, but he knew just from my physical size that I'd be decent at it, and he kind of talked me out to go throwing. And in 7th grade, I was the best on the team, and I won a bunch of meets, and then so I was good at it, and ever since then I was hooked on it.
Yeah, it's nice to be able to see that concrete improvement whenever you go out and you tweak that technique just a little bit here and there, and you get to actually see some concrete improvement instead of something that's more subjective. And
right, it's more individual based than any of the other sports at the junior high level, or just the beginning level, which I really liked. So when I stepped in the ring, it was only the hard work that I put in would show.
Sure.
Whereas football, you can put in as much hard work as you want, but if your teammate next to you didn't put in the hard work, then that's the weak chain in the link, and you might not do as well as you'd like to. And I think that's one of the great things about throwing is that it's all up to you. Once you step into that ring, you can't hide any of your weaknesses. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So if you didn't practice getting out over your left with a wide sweep out of the back for shot put or discus, then it's going to show in the meet. You can't hide that fact. Or I don't know, maybe if you're not getting your hips through at the finish, same
right.
thing. So it's very much an art form.
Yeah, I look at it as a martial art. It's very it's very cool nowadays to get into something like jiu-jitsu, and I think people who see all these people doing jiu-jitsu, like they got it, I think, from Rogan, and everyone is now jumping on that jiu-jitsu bandwagon, and that's awesome. To do that stuff is great. But I've always had that martial art since I was 15 years old. And the reason why I say it's a martial art is because all the same rules apply. So there's an incredible amount of discipline required in the training, whether it is the technical aspects of the throw, or the weight training and physical conditioning to get you in shape to throw far and put you in the right frame of mind to throw far. There's so much that goes into it, and there's so much to learn, and there's never an end to the mastery of the throw. It's an activity that as you get older you get better, just because of the amount of reps you have to put in to be successful. And I always harken back to when Mac Wilkins won his gold medal in the Olympics. I think he was right around 40 years old, and you figure he probably started when he was 13 or 14, just like most of us. And the sheer amount of throws he put in to get him to that point where he could throw the world record or throw far enough to win a gold medal, it's a mastery that you have to go through. And we were just talking about if I could take my 44-year-old brain and put it in my 25-year-old body, I think that the limitations to my throwing would have been gone. I could have thrown a lot farther knowing what I know now about training and technique and that discipline. And if I could have put it in that body, the sky would have been the limit. The problem comes from the fact that it takes so long for us to gain all that knowledge. And by the time you gain it, you're broken.
Yeah.
You know, you've beat your body to hell trying to get you to that point.
I kind of feel the same way coaching younger kids in the throwing now that I'm done competing, that coaching kids helps me become a better athlete.
Right.
So whether it's finding certain verbal cues that help them out that I didn't even know that would help me out, but as I'm doing it,
right,
and the kid, you see it in the kid's eyes, like you say a certain verbal cue and it'll just click.
Right.
So I definitely think as you get older, as you start coaching some of these events, you become a better athlete. Another thing, you called it a martial arts, but you can even go out on a limb and say that it's an art form in itself.
Yes. Yep.
Which is a painter, he practices certain strokes. I don't know much about painting or whatever, but when you look at a good painting, you're like, holy shit, that's a good painting.
Yeah.
And it's the same when it goes to throwing. As soon as they enter the ring or the circle and they go to throw, you can tell a good throw from a bad throw. You can tell who's put a tremendous amount of time and hard work into practicing their technique, getting strong in the weight room, and it shows in the ring because it looks good. And not only does it look good when you're a thrower, it also feels good.
Yeah, and you look at the different techniques to get to the same result. You look at it like an Adam Nelson, who has a completely different style from a Reese Hoffa to a Ryan Krauser. I was watching a girl the other day who I think Lucas McKay is going to get next year. Her name's Peyton Montana. Mm-hmm. And you look at those people throwing, and the technique is so completely different from each other. But they all have that artistic flair that they've put into that throw. They've been able to capitalize on their strengths and minimize their weaknesses and create this beautiful work of art where they are able to put this ball downrange, similar distances, but with completely different styles and frames of mind. And it's amazing to watch that there's so many different ways to get to the front of the ring with the ball behind your hip, and that is where it comes down to.
You have to find out what works for your body. So everybody has a slightly different body and like limb length, whatever. Everybody's built a different way, and with that, you need to find a certain technique that works for you. So you can, most of the time, it's trial and error, just like in training. You try to find something that works for you, and then if it works for you, you put it into your training regimen, you work in those verbal cues, those drills or whatever, it'll show in your throw. If it doesn't, you just throw it out. The other thing is, let's talk about how long it takes to get to that mastery level, because I think some kids or some people nowadays want to get to that mastery level right away. They're looking for that one cue that will make them throw 10 feet farther.
Right. Well, you look at someone like Judd, who was another guy who competed well into his 40s and is now breaking Masters world records in his 50s. And his technique at the beginning was much different than his technique at the end. And where I see it most is in the weight throw. When he was first, there's some grainy old footage of him throwing the weight with like 2 turns and his feet are all fucked up, and he's still throwing at 80-some feet because he was just an absolute monster. But then as he got older, that technique got more and more refined and more fluid. And you wonder the same thing, if he could have taken his 44-year-old brain and put it into this young kid with the bandana on and the long hair, how far he would have thrown. And the mastery of it is what makes throwing such a brilliant activity. There are guys that are going to come into powerlifting, and they're not going to last long, but they're going to come into powerlifting and they're going to deadlift 800 pounds in 2 years. And then they get bored, or they break, or whatever, but you can't do that in throwing. Nobody comes out of the gate, picks up a 16-pound shot, and 2 years later throws 70 feet. It just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
There's a tremendous amount of technique involved like jiu-jitsu, where you get these guys that are almost nerdy because you geek out on the physics of the movement and how to get your wide right leg sweep, or how to let the ball lead you in the hammer, or how to run away from the discus. And you know, Highland Games, you add even more. You know, I was talking to a guy this morning about what size caber he should be working with, and you know, I started talking to him about timing, and I can really geek out on the timing of the caber throw. And I didn't become a good caber tosser until I was in my late 30s, and I started when I was 17, because there was so much involved with the timing of the caber throw. And I had about 3 years where I felt like I was the best caber tosser in the country. There was no caber I couldn't turn, and the timing was just perfect. And it was the accumulation of a lot of strength training and getting that timing down perfect. And it's something that it just takes an incredible amount of reps in order for you to get there. And with caber tossing, because it's so heavy, it's very difficult to get that many reps. So it took years and years of putting it in. But I look at the best caber tossers that I ever saw, and the majority of them, Bill Anderson, Grant Anderson, Jim McGoldrick, these were older guys. They were big, strong guys, but they were older and had put a lot of time and energy into that. So when you look at track and field, usually once you get to college, you're into one, maybe two events, and then the guys that get into Highland Games, a lot of them came out of track and field. Now you're doing 9 events in a weekend, and there's so much more to learn. And I think that's what draws a lot of throwers to Highland Games, because now we have more mountains to climb and more technique to learn, and you get to geek out over that technique over the years.
Right. Yeah. I think it's really cool to look at the amount of hours people spend times doing specific drills on. So one of the things, just coaching younger kids, is they're like, what was wrong with that throw? I'm like, well, your right's not turning good. They're like, all right, how do I turn my right better? I'm like, you got to focus on it every throw.
Yep. And then something else falls off.
Yeah, then something else falls off. But even when they're concentrating on it, they're like, it's still not doing it. It's like, they're like, how do I get better at this? I said, you just need to work on it over and over and over and over and over and over again. And I think that's where discipline comes back into play, which you mentioned upon earlier, that it takes a tremendous amount of discipline to be really good at throwing, and through that discipline, it manifests itself in an art form when you get into the ring and compete. Yeah,
and there's so much good information out there now as opposed to when I was coming up. The only thing I had when I was coming up was little tiny track and field clips from ABC Sports or something that were maybe 3 or 4 seconds long. When I got into Highland Games, probably 5 or 6 years after it, a series of videos came out that were pretty good, where you could at least watch guys do things technically. But right now, it's a great time to be able to, go to YouTube and download the best throwers in the world and get to see how they train and how they compete, and check out techniques. And a lot of times they're even breaking down techniques for you, which is pretty amazing. The cool thing for me with throwing, the training was, when I retired from professional Highland Games, there was a switch that I couldn't turn off. So for 3 years I didn't do anything, and then I started to get into some Masters games. And the difference between my professional career and my Masters career was I didn't care so much about winning anymore. So when I was a pro, first of all, I needed the money, so I was constantly trying to make that cash throwing. Once I got in the Masters, there was no money on the line. I didn't really need the money in order to justify my throwing, but I couldn't turn that switch off in my brain, where I was still, even though I had been retired for 3 years, I was still going through 56-pound weight throw progressions in my head, or playing with the timing of the caber in my head, or the sheath toss and where I should pull that bag from. And when I got back into it, started training for some Masters competitions, I realized, I really didn't care where I ended up on the podium. I enjoyed the training and I enjoyed the throwing. So I would be out in the field for an hour and a half, 2 hours, and just getting into that flow state where I wasn't thinking about the gym or, you know, the any kind of issues I may have outside of that. I had a slab of concrete, a heavy weight or a stone, and I was just out in the sun throwing weights for hours and hours and just trying to perfect that technique and get that foot to turn just a little bit better and to feel the weight just a little bit further away from me and get that hip drive to the middle of the circle and get across the trig. And you get into that flow state where you're not thinking about anything else except getting that ball to go just a little bit further. The cool thing about throwing is I would put a towel out and I would throw over the towel. And then I would move the towel, and then I'd throw another one and throw it over the towel, and then I'd move the towel a little bit further. So you always got to see, oh yeah, my knees were tighter on that one. I got a bigger drive to the center on that one, and the ball went further. So you tweak these little things, and the further and further the ball will go. And it's very concrete evidence that you're improving, which is incredible.
Right, and I think that the flow state that you're talking about almost becomes a form of meditation.
Absolutely,
you know what I
yes.
mean?
Yep.
So you get into that zone, and everything else in the world doesn't matter anymore. Yep. It's just you and the stone, and the concrete ring, and that's all you're worried about for however long you're going to train for.
Yep.
And then when you're done, whatever problems you had just seem to go away. You know what I mean? And I hope that everybody out there has something that they can do, maybe not throwing, that gives them that same type of meditation. It may be working on computers, it may be reading books, or drawing a picture, painting a picture, whatever it is. I think that form of meditation everybody needs in their life.
Yeah, and it's definitely a form of meditation, and it will clear your mind. And there are Highland games everywhere. I encourage people to go out and go to their local games, check it out first, find a local pro in your area to help you. There's pros and masters athletes who were pros all over the country. Look to those guys for help. It's great to train with your buddies, but you want to train with someone who's got an eye for that technique and will help you get better. And because that's what it's all about. Yeah, it's fun to party after the competition, but you always want to improve and do better each time. And find guys out there that work with you in the weight room, and get you where you want to be. You're never too old to start this. It's not a guy-girl thing. You know, either sex can do this. I started when I was 16 or 17, whatever 1991 was. But you know, anyone, as long as they have the strength levels to handle it, can go out and do this. If you don't have the strength levels, start training. But yeah, it's a great opportunity to perform a martial art that's a little bit outside of what you normally think of as a martial art. You get in shape, you get out in nature, you get to experience that flow state and that meditative state, and you get to improve every day, which is the best part about it, I think.
All right.
Yep. All right. Zen of Throwing.
Zen of Throwing. There it was.